Cool. What should we chat about now?
Well, what is more naturally to think about when after you talk about spatial decomposition, classification of objects maybe, and yeah, well, the other important aspects of the schema.
Yeah. So um, classification is an interesting one because the moment, as I mentioned before, IFC comes with this massive, you can think of it like a dictionary of words you can use. And the moment you come up with words for things like wall or slab, you've essentially created a classification system because somebody has to decide what is and isn't a wall and what is and isn't a slab. So IFC comes out of the box with a kind of built-in classification system. And every single object in IFC, if we just, let's go show our model again, um, has a classification and a built-in IFC classification, and that tells you what that object is. So if I click on that and I jump to the object information tab, it tells me that this is a roof. You also see next to it, it says not defined. And that's because IFC is a two-level hierarchical classification system. So if you've ever classified anything before, typically a classification system will have different levels to it. It will have a sub-classification or a sub-sub-classification. So for example, in Uniclass, you can very easily have something which is 4 levels deep of classification, getting more and more specific to what that object actually is. Okay, it's a roof. What type of roof is it? Oh, it's a hipped roof. Okay, what type of hipped roof is it? Oh, it's a such and such and such. So IFC is fairly shallow compared to these other more famous classification systems because it's only 2 levels deep. And I think that's really quite nice, its shallowness, because very often you will want a starting point. You can think of IFC as a foundation or a starting point to describe your information. And then if your project does need something more specific, you can then connect it to have another more detailed classification system in addition to your existing classification code, the existing IFC built-in classification system. So 2 levels deep is really quite nice. And so the first level deep is a roof, and the second level deep, in this case, is not defined. And this is how IFC works, in that only the first level deep is mandatory. The second level deep, you can omit it, or you can choose from some classifications, or you can actually override it with your own custom classification. And that's really quite cool because many other classification systems are locked and set in stone, right? If you can't invent your own Uniclass classification code. You have to choose what's given to you. Whereas in IFC, if what's given to you is not appropriate for your project, you can just add a new one. So if we take a look at this wall, you can see that the second level down is a standard wall. That's actually not a very good classification for this wall. So yeah, we might need to improve on that. So I guess that's another really important aspect of IFC, is that it has a built-in classification, and it's only 2 levels deep, and that's actually a good thing, especially because the second level deep can be overridden. And the way that shows in the interface is here and here.
I have a question about this, Dion. Let's clarify this, like, first and foremost. Why do we have IFC wall class, and why do we have IFC wall, standard or wall standard case or standard wall case, whatever is that? And what's happening with that in newer versions of IFC? What is the history of that classification?
Yeah, so I guess for people who don't know, in IFC, there used to be, for some objects, such as walls and slabs, there was another type of classification. There was an additional type of classification known as IFC wall standard case, or IFC slab standard case. Basically the same thing with the word standard case written after it. And the idea back then, and this happened in IFC 2x3, so it was a very, very old idea, was that if you had a a wall or a slab or a door or a window, in 90% of cases, a wall is always going to be the kind of stretched out box that's extruded up and it has layers in it. It's that inform its thickness. And that's the simplest wall. Same with the slab. You've just got a box. Now we know in reality you can have all sorts of different shapes to slabs, and you can also have funky walls, like in all these Zaha Hadid buildings. But in this sort of standard, most common scenario, there is a very common wall shape, and that idea came out in IFC 2x3, that it would be beneficial to go and highlight this standard scenario so that viewers can make optimizations, or say that here are all my normal walls and then here are all my weird and wacky walls, and we'll cost them separately. Now, I guess in hindsight, people realized that was not such a great idea, that the classification should be more about the function of the object, not the shape of the object. So IFC went through this purge of the second level of classification, where for the few anomalies which refer to things like the shape of the object, they started removing them. So for example, if I go and edit the second level definition of a wall, you'll see some pretty strange things. Like you got moval walls, parapet walls, partition walls, plumbing walls, shear walls, and then solid, basically solid construction walls. And then you get some weird stuff like a standard wall, okay, a polygonal wall, okay, an elemented wall. Okay, so these three sort of stick out like a sore thumb, and the idea is that the first batch referred to the function of the wall, whereas a standard wall refers to the shape, in that it's this constant thickness. It goes along a path, a wall axis, which we can see, and it's extruded up. Whereas polygonal will not have this constant thickness. It might change, and so the traditional wall detail, where you say here are the wall layers, off you go, Mr. Builder, doesn't quite work in that scenario. And then you have elemented walls, where instead of drawing a typical wall detail and a length of wall, you're literally drawing out every single element of the wall, down to the studs and the insulation and the cladding and so on. So these three were more to do with how you draw the shape of the wall rather than the function of the wall. So that's what this wall standard case was. So it's now being removed. You should not use it because a standard case wall is identical to an object which has material layers assigned to it. A polygonal wall is equivalent to a wall which doesn't. Elemented wall is equivalent to an aggregate of sub objects like members and coverings that make up a wall. So
makes sense. Let me ask you one thing. So this is not like, you are talking first and foremost about IFC 4, right? So we don't have IFC wall standard case in IFC 4 anymore, or after that later in IFC 4x3.
I think in IFC 4, wall standard case still exists.
Okay. It was something, I saw something there.
Yeah, so you can see all of this still exists, but I think they were marked as
deprecated or something like that.
Deprecated, to be removed. And finally, in 4x3, they were all removed except for wall standard case from memory. And I could be wrong. I'll have to check. Yeah, let's check now. Yeah, there. So you can see the only standard case left is wall, because in the past it was so popular. Just people used it, probably not fully understanding it, or just defaulted to it because they saw other people using it. So they left it in there just a little bit longer to give people a little longer grace period to remove it.
Okay, when do you think it's going to be future major release. So is that IFC 4.4 or IFC 5?
I don't know,
Don't know.
but the next one it'll be gone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but as a rule of thumb, it's good to like instead of using that also for IFC to X3, just use IFC wall, right? And use a predefined type eventually.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, look, this is something a lot of people have questions about IFC classification, especially if they already use other classification systems. You know, if they already use something like Uniclass, they say, why should I go and reclassify everything using IFC? You know, what's the point? I'm already classifying it using Uniclass. And to an extent, they're absolutely correct. Like, why bother classifying it twice? It doesn't add any value. Um, but I guess what they might not realize is it actually does add value. And the first value is that whereas your classification system might only be useful in your country or your jurisdiction, IFC classifications work internationally. And that's really nice. IFC classifications are translated, but also IFC classifications are used in all sorts of other standards. So, for example, if you are delivering COBie, for example, for asset management, the what's considered maintainable is given in terms of IFC classes. And if you are doing if you are wanting to enter any sort of data next to your objects, IFC classes are what determine what properties can or cannot be inserted on that object. So these are really big benefits. Or also quantity takeoff. The type of IFC object determines the type of quantities that are automatically calculated by your software or have standardized measurement methods on them. So whereas these external classification systems, which are not so integrated, well, yeah, they aren't. These external systems like Uniclass are standalone. They're just a hierarchy of object types, but they don't integrate very well into other systems.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I'd recommend to everybody. Classify everything 2 levels deep. If you are in control of any sort of requirements, specify all your requirements in terms of IFC classes, and that will save you a lot of heartache. Never, ever say, I want these 15 bits of data across everything, because that it doesn't make any sense. Always put it in terms of IFC objects. So later on, if you ever write an IDS, IDS is also very well integrated into IFC classes. It's a first class facet in there. If you are doing things like clash detection, go and standardize your clash priorities and clash set rules in terms of IFC classes. If you're doing naming schemes, create your naming schemes based on IFC classes. So there's lots and lots of things you can connect it to, and it's really quite an easy classification system to learn. You know, I've learned quite a few classification systems. I would say maybe things like the Revit categories, because Revit categories are a classification system in itself. That's also really easy to learn because it's so little. Like it's also pretty much 1 level deep. I know Revit sort of has subcategories, but it's really only just 1 level deep. So it's really easy to learn. IFC is a little bit deeper. Uniclass takes a while, in my opinion, to really get a feel of it and know whether what you're doing is really the right thing. But yeah. Anyway, that's it. That's on classifications. Yeah, sure. Should we stop there?
If you want, and we can continue another time, yes, like with attributes, types, and like exactly how the interface is showing in this object information tab.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it is organized in terms of what's most important to least important. Like this really is the first thing you look at. and you just get a feel for where all your elements are. And then for a single element, you do really start up here and then you kind of go down.